At the March 22nd, 2023 Senate meeting, I say at time point 30 minutes and 8 seconds of the recording of the meeting that Section 2 of the referendum article means majority of the entire membership. There was no objection or contrary word to that meeting. I quote right from the Constitution. Stephen Holmes presented a 6-page packet of procedures to add to the Constitution during his public comment. This is item 7 of his proposal for a new Section 3 in Article VII of the Constitution. If a majority of the academic Senate members vote affirming the referendum, then the Senate action shall be null and void. It does not say if a majority of academic Senate members casting ballots vote affirming the referendum, like it does in the other sections of the Constitution. Why the heck not? Nowhere in the entire 6-page packet does it say majority of academic Senate members casting ballots. At time point 34 minutes and 42 seconds of the March 22nd recording, Corsock talks about Section 1 of the referendum of the Constitution stating 15% of the academic Senate membership. There was no objection or contrary word to that meaning. Now, let's take a look at the actual historical record of what happened when the Constitution referendum article was changed. The complete historical record is attached at the end, in which, after an examination of all Senate minutes and e-board minutes and supporting documents of the meetings from fall 2011 to spring 2014, you are given what those documents actually say about the Constitution and bylaws. The change to the referendum section of the Constitution was discussed in the Senate at just 2 meetings over a decade ago. McNellis was not on the executive board or a senator. For the entire time period of fall 2011 to spring 2014, when the Constitution revision and election was in process, McNellis attended just 2 Senate meetings, both in fall 2011, with one of those to talk about the Bekoff initiative, and the other meeting that he attended had no discussion of the Constitution at all. He attended none of the e-board meetings during that time period. McNellis was enrollment management chair in 2011 to 2012, but that was not on the e-board at that time. The Enrollment Management Committee was added to e-board in December of 2015. Holmes attended just 1 Senate meeting and none of the e-board meetings during the entire time the Constitution revision and election was in process. Holmes attended on April 18, 2012 to describe the Constitution changes, but the referendum article change was not discussed at that meeting. Who from today's Senate was on e-board during the time of the referendum change? Corsock and Strobel. Who from today's Senate was on the Senate back then? Anna Collins, then Anna Petker, and Clint Rigby. That's it. Those 4 people are more likely able to tell you the Senate's intent back then, but it was over a decade ago, and a lot has happened since then. The October 2011 e-board minutes do list the 3 people to ask to be on the revision committee: Terry Meyer, Michael McNellis, and Stephen Holmes. McNellis said that the intent of the authors was that the change in the text of removing the 40% quorum requirement for the referendum meant it would become just a majority of members casting votes. The intent of the authors was to make it easier for the rest of the faculty to be heard if there was a disagreement with their elected representatives. This is in the same Constitution revision that added a much higher bar to the ratification article to make it equivalent to the amendment article. There is no documentation of the intent of the change to have the removal of any quorum from the referendum vote mean that it becomes a majority of whoever casts a vote. That would be a great reduction in requirement for passing a referendum. Frankly, whether or not it was the intent of the authors that majority of members actually means majority of members casting votes is irrelevant. It is the intent of the Senate who approved the change, how the Senate interpreted the new language, recall who was actually in the room, and the clear statement of what is actually on the paper that matters. If a student writes a term paper and then later claims after the paper is graded and returned to the student that they meant something else substantially different from what they wrote down, I suspect that most of us would be a bit skeptical of that claim, or we would stick to grading what is written in the paper. Maybe we'd give that first-year student some slack, but I think we can expect more from those with advanced college degrees. If the intent was majority of members casting votes, then why didn't you write that down when you removed the quorum clause? I agree that in the original language, with the 40% quorum clause in there, that majority of academic senate members could mean majority of academic senate members casting ballots. But that interpretation is only possible if that quorum statement is in there. It is a substantially different statement if there is no quorum clause at all in there. And I believe that the Senate and faculty who voted in the change were interpreting the new referendum article to mean what the words actually say. Majority of members means majority of members, not majority of members casting votes. Because with the latter interpretation, you could have a very small number of faculty, even smaller than the number in the Senate, overturning a Senate action. But what about that 15% required to sign the referendum petition in the first place? Well, this assumes that everyone who signs the petition thinks the Senate did something wrong, and assumes that none of the signatories could possibly support the Senate action but still feel that a contentious issue should be brought to the entire academic Senate to decide, or could possibly feel that putting it up for a vote might finally stop a vocal minority in the Senate from keeping the acrimonious debate going. But let's assume that all 15% of the signatories think the Senate did something wrong. With zero quorum, that 15% could overturn the Senate action, an action taken by representatives elected by the entire full-time faculty body. So, for a full-time faculty of 358, we have 54 people overturning an action of a body of representatives elected by 358 people. Is that really the intent? Actually, it's even worse than that. Those 54 people are just making it possible for an election to take place where zero quorum is required. So you could have just 34 people voting and just 18 people needed to overturn a Senate action. Where did I get 34 people for this scenario? That's the number of people who voted in the fall 2012 Constitution revision, or just 13% of the faculty at that time. The number of people casting ballots could be even smaller. We're to believe that it was the intent of the Senate that striking the 40% quorum language so that the sentence became, if a majority of academic Senate members vote against the Senate action, then the Senate action shall be null and void, actually means if a majority of academic Senate members casting ballots vote against the Senate action, then the Senate action shall be null and void. We're to believe that it was the intent of the Senate to set up a plausible scenario where just 18 or fewer people could overturn a Senate action? Really? We're to believe that the proofreading of the 2012 Senate, including veteran English faculty, such as Kathy Freeman, who helped negotiate our current contract, where the language has to be precise, the proofreading of the Senate and the revision committee was so poor to forget to put in the crucial clarification of casting ballots like we have in the other Constitution articles. No one caught that oversight in over a decade? Really? A more reasonable interpretation of the documentation evidence we have is that the Senate's intent for placing it on the ballot was that the language was meant to raise the bar of the referendum from having a 40% quorum and a majority of votes cast, the original constitutional language, to it being a majority of the academic Senate members, membership, to overturn a Senate action. But let's say that the 2012 Senate's hidden intent was indeed a majority of academic Senate members casting ballots, instead of what the text actually says, majority of academic Senate members. The instructions given by the president of the academic Senate to the entire academic Senate before the election took place was that a majority of members, 180, was needed to overturn the Senate action. The president of the academic Senate was given no guidance as to the hidden meaning of the text due to excessive debate over 2.5 hours long in a fruitless attempt to create procedures, and there was no objection to the president's interpretation of that at the March 22nd meeting of what a majority of members meant. I used the most straightforward interpretation of the Constitution text in announcing the results. A majority of academic Senate members means a majority of academic Senate members. If the current Senate chooses to go along with this unspoken, hidden meaning of the text and changes the rules of the election after the fact, I believe that the credibility, the integrity of the Senate will be gone in the eyes of the students, classified staff and administration, and even most of the faculty, and possibly the Board of Trustees. How far the Senate has deviated from what we had in 2017-18 when BC received accreditation accolades for how BC makes decisions.